Turn with me in your Bibles, just like last week, to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew 7, verse 13. The Scriptures, the Bible, the Biblios. Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. Matthew 7, verse 13. Jesus says this, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Let's read it again. "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter it. But small is the gate, narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." Now, check this out. This translation is from a translation of the Bible called The Message, and this is the same passage, just in a different variation. Jesus says this, "Don't look for shortcuts to God. The market is flooded with surefire, easygoing formulas for a successful life that can be practiced in your spare time. Don't fall for that stuff. Even though crowds of people do, the way to life to God is vigorous, and it requires total attention." Two words that I would say are very sharp, and they cut. Vigorous, total attention. And we don't hear too much about the vigorous way of Jesus and how it requires total attention. We don't hear a lot about how hard it actually is. February 4th, 2006. This is what I wrote in one of my journals. I was at Houghton College at the time. "You've had faith all along." And this was the only entry that I made. Now, people make fun of me and they say, "Oh, you keep a diary?" No. I have journals, and I write my prayers out, and I journal lots of things that I'm wrestling with. And this is what I wrote, February 4th, 2006. I go back and I read those entries, and this is what I wrote: "You've had faith all along." Now, when I remember this day, I wrote these words. I was sitting in this very small room, and the room had a beat-up couch. It had this really beat-up love seat. It had a coffee table in the corner. In the corner of this room was a 16-inch television set that probably weighed 500 pounds. And it was on this little corner table in the corner of the room. Now, the walls of this room were all stuffed up, and this lounge was tucked in to this very small first-floor dorm at Houghton College. And so I locked myself into this room. It was a Sunday, and it was about 11:30-ish in the morning. I had been in that room for close to 3 hours, and all I had in that room was a journal and a Bible. And I never opened my Bible, and yet this was one of the most defining moments of my life and my faith. And when I hold myself up in this room, I was halfway through my senior year of college. I was studying ministry and studying theology, and I had just hit an absolute wall, and I was down and out. Let me put it to you straight. When you study the bigness of God, and when you dive into the deepest mysteries of the Christian faith, then you intertwine that with a personal journey in which you are wrestling with your past and all the hurts. Things can get really tough really fast, and suddenly your faith can very much be in flux. This was one of those points, and when I hit this point, I actually went to one of my professors, someone that I adore, and I said, "I just don't know if I believe this anymore." And I was completely honest, and this is what he said to me, and I was terrified about how he was going to respond. He said, "Mike, this is normal. This is normal." So I'm scared about the people who wrestle with this, but they don't voice it. They just bury it. He said, "This is normal." And I think what would be good for you, Mike, is if you took some time to just be with God. Don't read anything. Don't do anything. Just be with God in quiet and solitude. So I took his advice, and I woke up early on a Sunday, and I purposely locked myself in this lounge. And for 3 hours, I reflected on things. I reflected on my past. I reflected on my present. I reflected on what was happening in school, what was turning inside of me. And I cried. And I wept, and at points I was angry, and I slammed my fist on the table, and I just let it all out. And then there was this moment after 3 hours, this is the only thing I remember saying to God, I just don't know if I believe this anymore, God. I feel like I have no faith whatsoever. You know what the response was? Silence. But then there came this moment, and there was no audible voice. This wasn't an Abraham moment. There was no angel that descended and fireworks going off. Coming into my mind was these words, Mike, you've had faith all along. And if you didn't, you wouldn't be in this room with me. Now, you may assume that this experience brought me back to my feet and everything was smooth sailing from there, and I've had no issues or no doubts whatsoever since then. And you couldn't be more wrong, because guess what? Even after this moment, the heaviness remained, the doubts were huge, and there was still what many call dark nights of the soul. But I will tell you that after I heard those words, there was something inside of me that just said, I need to keep putting my feet on the floor, and I need to keep going and journeying through and trusting this process. Now, just a few weeks ago, I was talking with a very dear friend, and she had just finished her semester at college. This is a girl with very deep conviction, and she feels like she's called to ministry, and I know she is. And I remember her telling me, she said, I just feel like everything's falling apart in my life, and there's nothing I can do. I mean, here's a friend who I know is called to ministry, who has deep faith, deep conviction, and yet there's this undeniable, painful thing that is going on in her, and she feels like things are being stripped away. And many of us know what this is like, and some of us have never voiced these things before. There are a lot of long-time people in here where you don't express doubts. You don't question, you don't wrestle in the fear, because if I do that, what you don't realize is that everybody in here has wrestled with the bigness of God and the things that are happening in their lives. But the hardest part of these seasons for many of us isn't so much, it's just that it's difficult. The hardest part is that God, the one who flung this world into existence, God, the one who said he loves us, he's allowing this to happen. That's the hardest part. And so all sorts of questions start coming to the surface. Why? Turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16, verse 24. We're going to be looking at 3 different passages. So good to have your Bible out, or you'll be bored. Verse 24. Matthew 16, verse 24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for you to gain the whole world and yet forfeit your own soul? Turn with me over to the right to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8, verse 34. Mark 8, verse 34. Then he called the crowd to himself along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple, my follower, must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your own soul? Now, turn with me to Luke chapter 9. Some of you know exactly what I'm doing. Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Luke 9, 23. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for you to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit your very self? Now, for those of you who are asking, why did we read the same passage 3 times? Did we have to do that? Yes. Yes, we did. In the words of my grandmother, suck it up. I love you. Understand that the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke are all biographical type accounts of Jesus' life. And they are all written by 3 different people with 3 different perspectives on Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were all written 30 to 40 years after Jesus' life. And the question is, why did it take so long to write this down? They didn't write this down sooner because ancient people, especially those of Israel, they were a storytelling culture. And when you're a storytelling culture, you have to understand, like, there's no printing press, typewriters aren't there, big pens not happening, and there's paper that's it's hard to come by. So you tell stories, and this is how you learn, and this is how you pass down your heritage. You sit around fires, you sit in your homes, you do this all the time, and you tell stories, and you retell them, and you retell, and things just keep getting passed down. Now you will notice, when it comes to the plethora of stories and teachings that we have of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and even John, they share some of the same stories. You will look, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you'll say, wait a minute, this story's here, and this story's in this gospel. And yes, they share stories. Why? Because amongst the early believers, all of these stories and teachings are circulating by word of mouth. But even though they share some of the same stories, some of the Gospels don't share all the same stories. They have different stories. For instance, Matthew may share a story that neither Luke nor Mark has in their Gospel. Mark will share a story that only Matthew has recorded. Luke will share a story that only Mark has used. And it just goes on and on and on. And so the question is, why? Why do they do this? Now, when it comes to what we just read, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all share the same exact teaching of Jesus. Why? They all share this because this is central to what it means to follow Jesus. This is non-negotiable. This is central to what it means to follow Jesus. You can't get around it. You can't explain it away. It's just the way it is. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this is the hub. This is dead center. So the question is, how come we don't hear too much about how hard it is to follow Jesus? How come we don't hear too much about the things and the experiences and the hardships and the questions and the pain that comes with following Jesus? Jesus said, whoever wants to be my disciple, deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. For Jesus, non-negotiable. You can't explain this away. This is the narrow path. It's vigorous. It takes total attention. It's not, well, maybe I'll do it today. It's either you're doing it or you're not. In the words of the late author and theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said this: when Jesus calls a man, he bids them to come and die. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor and a theologian in Germany when Hitler and his Nazis came to power. Actually, at the time, Bonhoeffer was in the States and he was teaching at a seminary, and his friends said, don't you dare go back to Germany because this guy Hitler is an absolute monster and things won't go well. Bonhoeffer goes back and he ends up getting hung in a concentration camp because he spoke out against Hitler and the church that was caving to him. And Bonhoeffer says when Jesus calls a person, he bids them to come and die. For Jesus, essentially, following him means you're going to go straight into your own death. In the first century world, when we talk about a cross and taking it up, crosses meant death. There was no, let's see if you make it. The Romans were perfect, amazing. They were very skilled at murdering people. There was no, well, maybe he'll live. No, it's over. And so when Jesus says, take up your cross, essentially what he's saying is, now trust me and come with me to your death. Which is a very popular message. Everyone's signing up for that. American churches signed up for that one. We want to hear that. But for Jesus, though, this journey is non-negotiable. It's not, maybe I'll do it. It's going to happen. Trust me. Follow me. Come with me into your death. But Jesus is speaking of another death. And sometimes this death can be much harder than a physical death, and you're thinking, what in the world? The death of self. Selfish desires. Selfish preservation. I will do whatever it takes to make myself happy and comfortable and at ease and at peace. The death of one's own agenda and one's own opinions and stances. The death of unhealthy ways of living because we just want pleasure. The death of one's worldview. The death of one's political stances and social stances. The death of one's misguided beliefs about God. The death of one's view about the church and how the church should function. All of this is part of the death or deaths that Jesus is calling us into. The only problem is when you and I have been shaped to only look out for self, when we have been groomed from very young to only look out for our self-preservation, when the fingers and hands begin to get pried off self, it is a mess. It is bloody, bones are broken, it is very, very difficult, and it is very, very painful to let go. Fingers and hands are being pried off, and this is the reason we say things like this. I just feel like I don't believe this anymore. I feel like everything is coming apart. I feel like God is nowhere to be found. I feel like I have no faith whatsoever. These are the reasons in these seasons we begin to say these things out loud. And do you know what we're really saying with those statements? We just want things to be normal again. I just want to go back to normal. I just want things to go back to the way they used to work. I just want them to go back. But guys and girls, do you realize that normal is where self is at the center of everything? How do you know normal is what you really need? My wife is my best friend, and I don't just say that because I tricked her into marrying me. She is my best friend because she knows me inside and out. And there are moments, I share lots of stories about my wife because she's just amazing. And she's my best friend. She knows me inside and out. And I kid you not, there are times when my brain is not firing on all cylinders. Surprise, surprise. And I'm trying to put sentences together, and I'm trying to convey what is going on in here, and it's like paint hitting a wall. But she knows what I'm trying to say, even when it's an absolute mess. She's like Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. How many of you watch the show? She is the mic whisperer. She knows what I'm trying to say, even when it's not making sense and coming out in a foreign language. My wife has this ability to know right off the bat how I'm going to respond to certain situations, what I might say and what I might do. She knows there is no filter whatsoever. It will just come out and it will embarrass her, and so she tries to take me out of those situations. Now I say all this to say this. There have been very difficult seasons when I have sat with my wife and I have vented and I've cried and I've let it rip. I once remember being at college in the thick of that existential angst, and we sat in the car in the main parking lot of Houghton College, and I pounded the steering wheel with my fist and said, why does it have to be this way? There have been seasons when things just felt like they were all falling apart, seasons that literally felt like I was going to be crushed by the weight of what was happening in life, in ministry, seasons when God felt millions of miles away, uninterested in what was going on. And it was in those seasons when I sat with my wife, full of heartache and confusion and questions and anger and pain, that she would just say things like, Mike, what do you consider normal? I would say things like, I just want things to be normal again. I just want to go back to the way it was. I just want to go back. And she would say, what do you think is normal? Can you define what normal is? And then she would say, do you really think normal is what you need? She's like a more beautiful, taller version of Yoda. Pastor. and author Steve Deneff says this: normal is familiar. It's good, it's fair, it's right. Everybody likes normal because normal is what we were before our soul was troubled. But what if we weren't normal? Very true. What if we weren't even born normal? What if nobody was? And what if the normal we're trying to get back to isn't the real normal? What if things we're afraid of will wreck us are actually seasons that will jar us back to the real normal? For Jesus, our normal is where self is at the center of everything. But for Jesus, the real normal is when God is at the center of everything. The life of God is not found in self. The life of God is when we let self die. The life of God is not found in us holding tightly. It is found in us letting go completely. The life God has for us is not found in white-knuckling beliefs and behaviors and opinions and social stances. The life of God is found when we begin to do something called surrender. Surrender. And surrender is an everyday thing. It's not just a once and done. The life of God is found when someone says, I just can't do this, and I need your power and strength, and I need you to just invade me. I would argue that what we've done with Jesus, particularly in the American church, particularly amongst all of us, is we've not taken him serious. We've not taken him at his word. And what we have done is we have taken Jesus and we've bolted him onto the outside of self. Our desires, our dreams, our hopes, what we want, bolted. All of that takes center stage, and Jesus gets bolted onto the side. This is how we should believe. This is how God is. This is how the church should function. Jesus, you will be bolted onto the outside, and everything that I want, self, will take center stage. We bolt Jesus onto the outside of everything. And is this why many people walk away from Jesus? Is this why people just can't handle the hardness of what Jesus is trying to do with them? And when things get hard, and when it feels like God is just stripping things away, when it feels like God is not found anywhere, when it feels like things are crumbling, when it feels like we just can't get back to normal and we want to because it's comfortable and it feels right, what may actually be happening in these agonizing moments is God is stripping away. He is prying the fingers off of self, because life is not found in self. Life is found when God takes center stage.
Amen.
I just want things to go back to normal. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. I just don't know if I believe this anymore. When Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. I can't handle this. I am being crushed by the weight. I cannot stand up anymore. Deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. I got nothing. God, why? Why? When Christ calls a man, he bids them to come and die. Because life is not found in self. Life is only found in God at the center.